Everyone, I just finished watching The Hunting Ground. I wrote a couple notes here on what my opinions were for this film. What I want to start with is that I already had a general understanding of how universities handled these situations, mostly from stories I've heard from friends who went to big schools. It's one of those things that people kind of know about, but it doesn't really get talked about directly. Watching the film just made it clear how often this stuff gets pushed aside and people don't talk about it. But my first problem that I want to talk about here is universities protecting themselves over students. So the first thing I have to mention is how universities consistently protected their own image instead of protecting the students. The film shows example after example of schools downplaying reports, ignoring evidence, or trying to convince students not to file an official complaint. This wasn't surprising to me because I've heard and known people who've gone through similar experiences and have been told the exact same thing or been treated the exact same way. But seeing it laid out in a documentary really shows how deep it truly goes. This connects directly to what we learned about the social construction of gendered violence. It's not about an individual acting out. It's a whole system that allows this behavior because keeping the university's reputation clean is treated as more important than the safety of the people who attend the university. Next thing I'm going to talk about is the culture around big universities and how normalized it is. The second part that stood out to me was how the overall culture at big universities are normalized. I've never been in Greek life, but I have friends who've been in Greek life and know women who've been in sororities. The picture they described is the same type of environment this documentary covers. Places where certain behavior is ignored and everybody just accepts it as how it is. In the readings, gender intimidation is described as making people feel unsafe or inferior in certain spaces. And honestly, that lines up with what I watched in this film. And when something does happen, the victim blaming comes right behind it. Instead of focusing on the actual violence, people question the victim, what they wore, where they were, how much they drank, where they're coming from. That's exactly what the textbook explained. Next, I'm going to talk about the survivors creating a spreadsheet because I thought this was pretty crazy. The third moment that stuck with me was when two survivors created that spreadsheet and suddenly thousands of students began sharing their own experiences. That part basically said everything. It shows this isn't rare, it isn't isolated, it matches what we learned in the lecture. When violence is common, it reflects social values, not systems, not just individual choices. The fact that students had to create their own support system because the universities were doing anything is honestly pretty frustrating. It shows how ignored and unsupported so many people felt. My overall view on these universities, like I said earlier, none of this was shocking to me. Just because I've heard so many stories from people I actually know, but the documentary confirmed how widespread the problem is. The stereotype about big universities protecting themselves instead of students exists for a reason. Schools care about their brand, their rankings, their image, and those things matter more than student safety. This happens. What made this want me to look into, this made me want to look into title and how it's actually supposed to work. Clearly, there's a big disconnect between policies schools advertise and the reality students are living with. I'm curious what options students realistically have when something serious happens and how those systems can actually be improved. So wrapping up this semester, to finish up, I actually think ending this semester with this documentary makes sense. everything we learned, gender roles, communication, power, all of it really shows in this film. Everything was present. It's a tough topic, and probably it isn't the happiest thing to watch, but it ties everything together in a way that feels relevant and connects the whole class. So I think it was a good choice. All right. That's everything that stood out to me. Thanks for watching. Take care.